Hello, good evening, everyone. My name is Anna Walker, and I'm the Wingate Foundation Assistant Curator in Decorative Arts, Craft, and Design. And I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight for this conversation that we're going to have with these two spectacular individuals. I also want to thank my co-organizer, Kenitra Fletcher, who's the Assistant Curator of Modern and Contemporary Art. We're always really excited when we have artists that can really dovetail between both of our departments, and Joyce is definitely one of those artists. Special thanks to Eleanor and Frank Fried Foundation, who made this program possible this evening, and also Margaret and Linda for your work, and everyone else here at the museum for your work on making this program happening. As a reminder, just for housekeeping item, want to make sure that everyone turns off their cell phones or puts them on vibrate, please, so that we don't have any unexpected interruptions. I'm just going to briefly introduce both our individuals and then really let them take the floor. Tonight, in conversation with Joyce Scott, we have John Guest Jr., who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Houston Museum of African American Culture. He's also Managing Consultant of Guest Group Incorporated and a Principal in the Dallas-based Access Seminars. Mr. Guest has served on the boards of the Contemporary Art Museum Houston, the MFH Glassell School and Core Committee, the Marnie Rose Foundation, Reach Across Houston, and the Houston Arts Alliance. Currently, he serves on the boards of the Cynthia Woods Mitchell Center for the Arts, Gulf Coast Journal, and the National Board of Artadia. Along with his partner, Melanie Lawson, he is a collector of African American, glass, and contemporary art, including works by Joyce. Joyce Scott describes herself as a round-the-way girl from Baltimore, Maryland, the city where she was born and continues to call home today. She received a BFA from the Maryland Institute College of Art and an MFA from the Instituto Allende in San Miguel de Allende, Mexico. She has received 2 honorary doctorates, one from the Maryland Institute College of Art and the other from the California College of Art. Her many awards include a MacArthur Foundation Genius Grant that was awarded in 2016, and this year she was named the Smithsonian Visionary Artist in recognition of her outstanding work in jewelry. Her work has also appeared in solo and group exhibitions internationally, and she's held in the collections of the Baltimore Museum of Art, the Smithsonian American Art Museum, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and the Museum of Fine Arts Houston. We're so pleased to have her work currently on view in the exhibition Mending Craft and Community upstairs in Alice Pratt Brown Gallery. And with that, I'd like to welcome John and Joyce and thank everyone for coming.
Well, thank you all for coming. I always enjoy being one of Joyce's sidekicks. And
I've never kicked him in the side, ever.
and you know, I always tell people I have 2 hometowns, Baltimore and Houston. And the part of it that's Baltimore is raucous and in your face, and so hopefully we're going to have that kind of conversation. And we're going to start off, I think, at the beginning. I'm going to talk a little bit about Joyce and her background and have her talk about her background and her family. And then we're going to talk about some lofty art world kind of issues. And then we're going to get down to talking about what we came here to celebrate Joyce about, her work in jewelry. And then end up with just a couple of social commentaries, because this slideshow has Joyce talking to us about more than what we came here to celebrate her about, and then open it up for questions. So, first thing I want to say, Joyce, by way of the background, you come from an extremely talented, multi-generational family, and that family has influenced your work. You've got to show up with your mother, your late mother, in Baltimore right now. You've got your father, who was an exceptional quilter. Both of them grew up in a sharecropping experience. Your grandparents and your great-grandparents were enslaved, and in those environments, there were environments where people took materials and reused and repurposed them. And those were always for practical reasons. Your generational family, sometimes it reminds me of the Littleton family, where they generationally looked at glass as something that would be industrial but artistic. Your family extended the use of repurposed and reused materials and turned them into something that was beautiful. All of a sudden, by the time your dad and your mom were involved with repurposed or reused materials, they were making those into something that was beautiful. So my question, I hope I got most of that right, and my question for you is, how did that impact your work growing up generationally with that kind of culture behind you?
Thank you. I firstly thank you, John, and thank Houston for bringing me down. There was one small
Glitch.
glitch, and I have to correct it because my father right now is in heaven laughing. My father's from Durham and Brightleaf, North Carolina, talk like that, and he never did a quilt ever. Nor did he ever want to do a quilt, something like that. Hell no.
There's some special
It was
things
my
there.
mother's father. Now, how did that really influence me? Well, when people ask me about this, I just say that I was an artist in vitro. Since my mom is an artist, I just jumped out of the womb. I think I had on a little beret and a French painter's. I looked at the doctor and said, "Move, you're in my lights." I needed. I went back twice because I didn't like the first two takes, but boom, boom. This is an old enough audience to know Shecky Green when they hear it. I was always raised around creativity. Now, everybody is in some way, but my mother and her side of the family and my father's mother were overtly creative. It's the old Southern and or slave comment about making something out of nothing. And that really is what they did, because my parents were children of the Depression as well. People would upscale or reinvent things because they actually had to. My mother's family picked cotton and my father's family picked tobacco, and they both picked vegetables. And when, they had victory gardens so that they'd have enough food to feed all their children. My mother's father worked on the railroad, but he also raced horses, and he was a musician. He was a quilt maker. Both sides of my family made white lightning, which is a drink. Don't think I'm talking personally about anyone in the audience. You might, with our political situation today, you might think I'm not. So everybody had 1,000 jobs, and children very young learned how to do something. Both of my parents grew up and went to one-room schoolhouses when they weren't in the field doing something. So they imbued me with this knowledge of being creative, because you had to support yourself in a way that wouldn't happen for you generally outside of your family. And also they were into recycling and everything long before it became au courant, because they didn't have choices.
So there's a part of you, too, that I come from a multi-generational family on both sides that were entrepreneurs. So all of our history was creating opportunity for yourselves. It's part of the essence of who we are. And it seems like you come from the same kind of background. Mm-hmm. The added part of that, though, is your family taking on social issues. Mm-hmm. You want to talk a little bit about how you looked up at your parents and said, you know what, if they do that, I can do that too.
Now, I was born in 1948, which means I was a child of the 50s. That means I still remember separate water fountains, and I remember demanding that my mom take me to a segregated movie theater to see Snow White. See the irony in that right away. My mother said no, because we'll have to sit in the balcony and we'll have to enter separately. And I was like, but I must see it. I didn't have an English accent back there. I'm sure it's like the little Joyce. You have to take me to see it, Mama. You're supposed to find the baby, and I need to see it right now. And my mother said, okay. So she said, I'm going to take you so you can see. Of course, when you're young, you're like, And I always think that the mezzanine is probably the best place to sit in the theater. But we had to walk up side steps, and there were no white people in the balcony. And we sat right on the ring, the circle, which I thought was really great, but I didn't know that we were impelled, we were forced to do that. And of course, I was my mother's only child, so I'm sure I demanded popcorn and everything else. She talked to me about how belittling that was for her. And she did it not only so I could see it, but see the film, but so I could see how, in the least possible way, because I was a kid, there was something different about me. And the difference was my skin tone and my place in society. They also, both of them, had to get around not easily maneuvering through everyday life. So my mother would tell me that if there's something she really wanted, and she had a really good madam, whoever she worked for, then she could tell her to get it for her at the department store. That was done by many women. That hat they wanted, or that scarf, or the hose. I'll tell you a story about my dad. I told you, my dad was tall, lighter skinned. My mother said when she met him, he had on shoes that were those buckskin shoes that were like almost like a mustard colored, short denim pants. He had these curls coming from behind his hat. And the more she talked about him, I said, that's like, one of those like Buster Brown or somebody. What does that guy, like Lil Abner? I said, Ma, that's Lil Abner. She said, that is Little Abner, and the worst thing I ever did was teach him how to dress, because the women then never left him alone. My father worked at Bethlehem Steel. Bethlehem Steel was one of, if not the largest, steel companies in the United States, at least on the East Coast. There was one in Pittsburgh. And I heard this story from my godfather, who was also from South Carolina, who, after he retired, would drive me to the airport whenever I'd go. That was our time together. He was darker skinned. And he used to tell me, you know that story about your dad? I said, no, what are you talking about? I'm going to use the N-word today because it is apropos. He said every day your father would walk in, and there'd be this little gaggle of white guys who called him a nigger. And they called him every kind of nigger. Red nigger, yellow nigger, Indian nigger, black nigger. Because he worked and had good relations with Polish people, Polish nigger, just any kind of nigger, I don't know, hopscotch nigger, you name it. He was called that. And my godfather told me one day he just walked in, and this one little rowdy guy just wouldn't stop. And he just picked him up, and he was walking with him to the smelter to drop him in. But he wasn't making a joke. He was going to kill him. Shows you what racism will do. And my godfather said men were jumping on him, and he just whacked them off, because he was literally devoted to ending that man's life, because that man meant all the racist things that he'd ever had his whole life. It took a lot of men to bring him down. They didn't say anything to the big bosses. And I'm sure this is the way he heard nigger in the future. But he never heard it again. He almost had to kill someone to get the basic respect as a human. So I realized, as my father suffered from alcoholism and other things, and his inability to understand me being self-assured, that it had a lot to do with every day him being pummeled by this. I realized that late in my life. But I also know that when my art teacher took me, got me a job as an arts counselor in the woods in Maryland, and my mother and father drove me to that job. And remember, they'd left the South during the Great Migration to get out of the woods, to get away from people who would not let them leave their houses at night, night riders, cluxers, all of that kind of thing. And they kept driving me, and I was, from Baltimore, and I'd gone to good schools, and I was just really happy to have this job. And as we got deeper into the rural area and the street lights were gone and the road lights were gone and there were just trees, they got really frightened. When they got there, they said to my teacher, "Are you sure?" And Olin Yoder said, "She's the one." So they had to drive home with this fear, but with the possible knowledge that this would push me to the next level. For black parents in the 60s, early 60s, to take their child and just let her be in an environment where not only she was in the minority, but she was in a really suspicious area, to give her the freedom of choice, it's a big deal.
It's a big deal.
And I worked there for 2 years. It's a very big deal for them.
So there's a part of your work that, given your background, there's a part of your work that we know you create because it needs to exist.
Yes, thank you.
And I guess another way of, and I would think that somehow what about your background motivates you to decide what needs to exist. But a more mundane way of asking the question would be, how do you choose the subjects of your work? Is it existential, or is it some more really earthly bound kind of factors that come into play?
Well, you know, I like to choose existential because that just sounds good.
It does, doesn't it? I use that.
I was
love
choosing
that.
this because it's existential.
I had to get.
Well, it's a combination of all those things. Like everything else in life, it's usually just not one road that drags you down it. I am someone who's a pop culture girl. I am very much influenced by what I see every day. I'm very much influenced by it because I don't lose who I am because I'm an artist. I still have to pay rent. I don't pay rent. I still have to pay gas and electric, a water bill. How do these things not influence what I do? I still live in a very challenged neighborhood. I remember as a kid living in a neighborhood where, because people couldn't get other houses. You know that when the GI loan came in, black soldiers came, but they were not privy to all the loans. So they couldn't easily buy houses like others did in the suburbs. I lived in an area where your dentist and your doctor and possibly your lawyers and your teachers really lived in basically the same neighborhood. They were moving out, but I saw those people. So I'm living in my neighborhood because that's, I think, the example that I can present. And they call me Mama and Miss Joyce. What you up to? Saw you on TV, Miss Joyce. I create what I do a lot of the time because it's existential, because it is what's inside of my head. Now, many times the core of it is the existing inside of the social and the political angst that I feel about what's happening today. I was a hippie, a flower child, and I don't believe that I thought we would have this president ever. Now, a lot of you may be pro-Trump, but and I believe that we're living in a country where you should vote for who you wish. The one thing that I know about this country, the one thing that I know the Constitution says, the thing that I know all of our families fought for, was the freedom of expression. It is what's different than many cultures. I have been blessed to travel the world, and I know that when people carry their, their IDs, it has things stamped on it that not only talks about their, driving and their age, but their religion, possibly their, in quotes, caste, and they don't talk about it in fear. So for our president to say, if you don't like it, go back to your shithole country. When 3 of the women were born here, and his family is a family of immigrants, that's uncool.
Okay, Joyce, I want you to save some of that because we were going to come back to that
Okay.
at the end. Okay.
But that's why I make work.
So in this lofty kind of conversation we're having now, you do work in different formats, different mediums, glass, you do sculpture, you do performance, you do quilts. How does the art world, how does your work fit into an art world that still hasn't decided what's fine art, what's craft, what's art, and what's culture?
When I tell you about my background, I have to tell you that and this is just the Negro spiritual, y'all. It really is. I am such a classic African American girl from the East Coast. I stand on the shoulders of people who had no education but wanted it and saw that light in me. I literally am hoisted up. I'm bolstered by folks who would give me their pennies to make sure that I could go to school or go on that field trip. When I would walk the 1 block to my elementary school, all the moms would be, because these were in apartments, and the projects were on that side, new apartments, new projects for soldiers who just gotten out of the war. These were like transitional places, folks. All these little kids would be walking to this school, and they'd be saying, "Hey, little Joyce," and they'd be sometimes laughing because I had 40 pounds of stuff in my hair, and I draped my garments. They knew I'd be walking back from the principal probably, or the principal would get me and take all that stuff out of me. These people who yelled "Little Joyce" were the ones who would read to me, would make sure when my parents were working late that the kids were all right. I was a latchkey kid, so I would come in and Miss Agnes on the first floor would make sure I made it to the second floor. I did my homework and called my mom. My mom let 2 kids come who I'm still friends with 60 years later. And I found out later that to feed them, she would eat as much as she could at work because they may not have enough food. I stand really on the backs of these people. So when you ask me about this, I'll tell you what my mother would say: I shall not be denied. I will not be denied. When people still don't think that I went to art school. Did you go to art school? I was born in 1948, not 1848. The fact that I went to Mexico and went as a hippie, but stayed, and that propelled me to travel the world, that's because somebody told me I could do it. My ancestors are right there. They're guardian angels for me. So when I make work about what I see, when I have this voice, when I am who I am, it's because I don't think I could be less. I should not be less. And I should be an example for those younger kids who might say, I'm not sure. I'm telling you that you can persevere. You may not have it all at the same time, but you can have it all.
Well, I'll tell you, the other aspect of that I do want you to comment on is we had a conversation over at the Houston Museum of African American Culture last Saturday with a curator from Dallas, Benito Huerta, and he was talking about Latino artist Kathy Vargas, curator Kathy Vargas. And he said when she started out making her art, she went to, at the art school that she was at, she went to a professor, and he said, you can't do all of this. That's not really art. And he suggested, so there were problems that how do you come to terms with what's art and what's not? And I'll give you one example that I cited about that cultural difference. So one of my goddaughters, who's Mexican American, her grandmother came here, and we came to the Museum of Fine Arts. And we said, Grandma, look at this. This is fantastic. What do you think about this art? And she said, well, you know, it's okay, but you know, there's no black velvet. And we're thinking like this, but there's a whole cultural concept
Exactly.
about that. So what do you think about, what was it like for you at Micah? Did you run into any of that? How free were you to develop your art? Or did you develop it in
I was
spite of-
incredibly free to develop my art, but that had to do with what time it was. It was 1966 to 1970. So this is the civil rights movement. So these are hippies and flower children. This is a political movement where people are talking about freedom, freedom of expression, marching, all of that. I was not a marcher. My parents would have dropped dead. I told you about them taking me into the woods, so you can imagine me. But we did all kinds of stuff in school and painted posters and did all kinds of stuff like that. I want you to know that what you're talking about, I was very free, but there were things that just weren't taught. And I ask people today, I said this to Susan Plum last night. Okay, I'm going to be in a circle a bit. I was just in San Francisco receiving that honorary doctorate, and there was a young African-American student who said, "Can I show you my glasswork?" And I'm like, "Sure," because my godson was giving me a party at his house, and he's an artist. And when I talked to her about her work, she said, "That's probably the best critique I've had in my whole time in school." I'm saying, "Why?" She said, "Well, I want to talk about slavery or African American history, and they either don't want me to or they don't know how to." I said, "Well, I tell students, because they say, it's African artwork is not applicable to now, and it's about old things who need." I said, "Well, ask them why that doesn't work, and you have to study all that old-ass Roman and Greek stuff. When is the last time you used Corinthian column in a conversation with anybody?" So when I was just the keynote speaker at the College Art Association, I'm very proud of our art teachers and our art administrators and our curators and all of those folks. But my call to arms was to continue what you're doing, diversity in all levels, students, administrators, teachers, and also remember to be diverse in what you teach. Because now we are global, and you just can't consistently use the same canons. That's what's happening now, that in 2019, an African American student should tell me that they can't talk about a global issue like that. Talks about who's teaching them, how they're locked in the same old, and how we must change. And my artwork is about change, evolution. I'm very Buddhist in that sense.
So now we're going to turn and talk about jewelry.
This whole thing.
I think I saw it on the screen. So what made you decide to make jewelry a part of your art practice?
I've always been a jeweler. It was one of the things that I did as a teenager. I had my jewelry in my first store when I was 16 years old. And you make it for your friends. And it's entry-level buying for everyone. When students ask me, "How am I going to get through the summer?" Make jewelry. It's entry-level buying, and it isn't only that, but it teaches me a lot about design, connectivity, and all the stuff that you have to do to make sculpture for the body. I also chose jewelry because I love being able to insinuate people into whatever theme I'm talking about by what's on my body. I have on a beautiful calm piece, and the two pieces in the show are not about death, lynching, rape, but I do those too. In fact, I'm going to use the N word again because it's important. There is a Texan woman. I tell everybody that I am very Texan. I have big hair. I like to wear boots all the time, and I eat steak. This isn't necessarily everybody, because it's like, it's not. No, I can't eat steak. Or maybe just a little piece, and it's got gluten. I don't want the bread because I eat steak. she was someone that I'd never think would do it because she was older than I at the time, and there was a big necklace that I had that had very stereotypical African faces with the lips and the, you know, the nose, and it was yellow and then had nigger lips all over it. And she bought it. Now, you know, sometimes you go home and think, and what is she going to do with that? Am I going to see a picture of her at a Klan meeting with nigger lips? Quite honestly, sometimes when you make certain kinds of work, and the majority of my work is not bought by African Americans, I do wonder what's happening at home. Because I made a lot of black penises and sculpture including them, because I was talking about the sexual objectification of African American men. And then you go home and think, and is this person buying it because they're into the sexual objective? Anyway. I saw her again years later, and she said, actually she had the necklace on backwards, so it was misspelled. And she said, people come up to me and they start reading it, and when they read it, I got them. And then they start talking about race. And she is someone, good old Texas girl, you'd never think it. And she's got them. So that's the scheme. That's my raison d'etre.
So you kind of go into one of the questions I was going to ask. When you think of jewelry, do you think of jewelry that's worn? Do you think of the body type? Do you think of yourself, or do you think of it being on other people?
I don't even know if I think of any of that. I think about the importance of its existence, and I think those who want it will buy it and wear it to the best of their ability. Some people buy it and don't wear it. They like the form, they're jewelry collectors, but they don't necessarily buy it to wear, or they'll wear it at very special times and then they'll mount it on the wall so people might see it. I see jewelry as body sculpture. No, it's not the exact same thing. But it does use dimensionality. A lot of it can be three-dimensional. A lot of it's made out of the same materials, metal, just smaller. And I use the same kinds of aesthetic choices and skills that I would do to make a larger piece of sculpture. So I see it as real artwork. Some people see it as adornment or decoration, and to some degree it is that. But the reason why I use these social and political issues in it is because I see it as the same work as I see the rest of my work.
So technically, does it matter if the jewelry is worn or presented on a pedestal? Is there a difference?
I always make jewelry to be worn. I always make it so that you don't die when you're wearing it. We used to make jokes about European jewelry. At one point, it was all really big, and if you had it on just at the right angle, you would lose a jugular, kind of like, oh, you've seen the necklaces that are really big. And then you've seen Africans and sometimes people in Asia with neck stretchers and layers and layers and layers, but they're all balanced and they're all made in a different way. I make jewelry to be worn, but it doesn't mean that I then have to control the appreciator, the person who appreciates it. If they love it as sculpture instead of something that's always worn, then I'm very happy that they see the beauty in it in that way.
One of the things that you do so successfully is, you know, the artistry of your work. I mean, you just described that people are taken in by it, the beauty of it, and then afterwards they're hit with, for lack of a better word, a message that you're sending with that work, that artwork. So the question I then ask you is, so I'm looking up I'm in Baltimore with a group from Houston, art group from Houston, and we're there for the first time. They're there, and they were thrilled that I knew curators and the Maryland Institute College of Art professor, and it's my second hometown. And Joyce had taken over the Baltimore Museum of Art to be in.
Just took it over.
Just took it over. And seriously. And when we first walked in, here I am with my good art folks from Houston, where, we're timid to talk about these things. I have that issue all of the time here. Racism exists here. Okay. But we walked in, and what did we see? The first thing we saw, Joyce had this antebellum, I'll never forget it, this antebellum woman, white woman, hugging a black penis.
Yes? And what's different about that?
So that was then. Tell me how much that would be relevant now.
Well, I think we are fooling ourselves as we don't think that racism is still very virulent. It may wear a different mask now. I'm always delighted and a little kind of bemused about all the, I know you're watching TV and all of the kind of commercials have biracial groups and biracial husband and wife and a little kid, and they're all doing things together, and it is a way of promoting that, and I'm promoting the freedom to do that, and I'm happy about it. I just don't want us to believe that we are post-racial, post-black, or any of that, because I still can be walking down the street and be called the N-word. I still can go into a place and I'm looking good. I have gone into a business, and I'm also 70, y'all.
Here, here.
And been asked if I'm going to pick up. Are you here to pick something up? What? I actually laugh because that says to me that that young person has no home training. And I don't have to do a thing. You're going to say that to somebody, and you will have a correction, but it won't be me.
Okay, so as we're running out of time, and I'm a staunch Virgo,
What does that mean?
that means that I'm on time, and most of my life, I've been waiting on other people to get there. So we do want the audience questions. So the last thing I want to ask you about, okay, during this time of Me Too, let's talk about your rape series.
Yeah.
What propelled you to really start some time ago to do that series?
Well, I'm saying something that it took me 70 years to say. And I, as a very young child, was also abused sexually by a cousin. I can say it now because they're all dead. I thought I was working through it, and when I finally said it this year because of some reason, I can't remember why, my friend said, "We know, it's been in your work always." The work that you're talking about, this Day After Rape series, it just was just the audacity, the belief of personal rights that would allow men in droves to just rape women and not be punished for it. The fact that young girls in Asia and Africa and the United States can be waylaid, gang raped, die, and not go to jail. Now here, it's not so different. Here, it is different.
Except in Alaska.
Well, like we always hear that, and African Americans always are saying, for good reason, that when you're looking in newspapers and when you're seeing that the girls who get and the boys who get the most play are the young white kids, supposedly the largest percentage of missing women, women who are not found, and women who are not getting justice are Native American women. Not only in Alaska, but in all the reservations. And especially if it happens in the wintertime, because you may not even be able to get to that young woman until it thaws. I consider all of that to be 100% wrong. I consider, I don't have children, but the person, the woman, the mother from whence everybody sprang should be seen as your equal, if not incredibly special. And so I'm going to keep making artwork about it because I'm bedeviled by it and can't understand why others don't see it, especially the men who won't stand up, chastise, and change other men from doing it. And I will always talk about it until
So now is the time we open up for questions.
then. They're like, really? On that one?
Well, I have one more for you, but and just quickly. So, given the society that you've been talking about, tell me, what is the role of artists in a society like the one we are in today?
It's the same as we've always been. I mean, people don't always understand that making beautiful things is a political statement. In a time of hunger and anger and angst, to be able to find beauty, to share it with others and let them see that, that's a political statement. To be able to talk about issues that throttle you just like they do others, but do it in a way where someone is mesmerized, they just want to see it, and maybe go home with something. That's a social activism, a political statement. To be an art teacher and tell people and help people to find that creative source and to keep creating for the rest of their life. That's social activism one-on-one, and that's a political statement. So I think it's what artists always have been. Some people think we're the emotional heart of the society. I just think we're just as important as everybody else. That's all I want to be. Seen as equal, just as important as everybody else. Then my job's being done.
And so is mine, and that's my best last question, and it was a good one. Now, are there any questions from the audience? You've been looking at the work. You've seen what we've been talking about on the screen. Any questions from the audience?
I wanted to yell Alejandro because I like this. We
Yeah.
should really do applause for our technician tonight who's been wonderful. And he put up with me saying, no, I don't want like this. Yeah. So applaud Alejandro. Questions, comments?
Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Scott. Do you want to talk a little bit about words like jewelry versus words like sculpture in relation to your work?
She asked me if I want to talk about words like jewelry and sculpture, that maybe the difference or the whatever in relationship to my work. I know that some people don't actually even see what I do as sculpture. They see it as some kind of crafty dimensional thing because of the materials that I use. You've seen some images of glass and beadwork on top of glass. I simply say they're wrong. If you look in the dictionary, then sculpture is defined by its dimensionality. It's not necessary materials. And if you are going to be historically correct, then you'll know that sculpture was made out of everything, depending upon what people could get their hands on and what period it was. So when people like to make that kind of differentiation, a lot of times it has to do with status, the belief that jewelry isn't as good as, the belief that using the kind of materials I am makes me a home crafter or some kind of handicrafter and not an artist. And I say to them, you are wrong. And I have no problems with taking time and explaining to you why. Because I shall not be denied. People, here's the thing I wanted to say earlier. When I talk about standing on people, people actually died for me to be here. For you also. But people died for me to have the ability to sit here. Not so long ago, it would not have happened. I was with a high school kid maybe 20 years ago, and he was saying, things didn't change. A little white guy. Things don't change. So I said, babe, not so long ago, I'd be calling you Mr. Bob, and you would not be my student. So I will not be denied. And when folks have that, there is enough use of materials now by contemporary artists that they just are wrong, and there are lots of examples that show them such. Usually means they don't want to pay the full price, is what it usually means. It does. Someone else. Yes.
Who's your favorite artist?
I don't have one. I don't, because each one, she asked who's my favorite artist, and I don't have one because each one offers something so very different in work. I mean, I was talking to folks today about Sonia Clark and the flag that she did, the Confederate flag, which is really about the submission flag, the flag that was made out of dishcloth. That was the real Confederate flag. I like what she does, but she does what she does. The arena is open for me to love and like everybody, and many times it is not an artist, it's more a cultural group, so I might be staring at mass eyes forever. And then again, I might be looking at something that was made in Russia. I mean, those eggs and stuff. I mean, really, if you've ever gone to a museum and looked at one, you're like, these people are crazy. I would just sit there and look at that egg forever. And a lot of the things that also make me process art, and push art forward aren't even the visual stuff. It's about spoken word, music. If I could be 23 years old with a drop-dead body, I would jump on top of Bruno Mars and I are about the same height. So I could take him. I would take him. I would do things to him. I'm saying in a crowded room. So, and all I do is talk about, they were with me today, I've talked about Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. Now that pop culture thing about a black Samoan being the highest paid male actor supposedly, that's social justice right there, y'all. So that's the kind of stuff that influences me, not always the visual art or a single artist.
But you have been part of a review.
The Thunder Thigh Review, you mean?
Thunder Thigh
Yeah, there was
Review.
a picture of Kayla Wall and I, and we were in black lace, and I had on a hat. You saw us on the left side.
Thunder Thigh
And
Review was good.
unfortunately, the cellulite on my thighs now have the exact same look as that lace had. We traveled all around the United States, Scotland, Holland, Canada, during the time when Whoopi Goldberg, Kathy and Mo, and that's a Me Too movement. That was an old Me Too movement, feminist movement. Doing work that performance work and music that we created ourselves, talking about the social joys and woes that we experience.
Any other questions out there
Or comments.
or comments?
I can't believe this. Oh, yeah.
No, this is
There's a lady right there.
there.
I still have it, so it's how am I using it? I mean, people especially thought I was going to get liposuction or something immediately. I make jokes, but it's a real thing. I took care of my mother for 14 years. She slowly progressed with dementia, and she was the very last slide, and you could see how wizened she'd become. And after that, I thought, and what kind of career do I have? And I went back to making work. And we kept having, 2008, you had that downfall, and there are all kinds of things going on. And I do believe this: God protects little animals and crazy people, both of which I am. And the MacArthur has given me something to help me know that I can fall back on my bad behavior. Because if I'm going to make work, some of the things you saw were about Harriet Tubman. If I'm going to still make work on the horrors of our life, and I'm trying to figure out how to correctly do something on the political situation we're in now that's not the same that everybody else is doing, well, I may not sell work for a while. And so that's been amazing, but let me step back and say it is a big chunk of money. And the last time I looked at the MacArthur, it was $200,000. And I thought, Then they told me how much it really is. It's $625,000. I was like, oh, Lord. Now, I want you to know that I told people, if I ever get a big chunk of money, I'm going to get like a $10,000 in $1 bills and shape it in a man in a bed and just wallow in it for I don't know how long. That's a very funny joke. Some people are like, oh, no. Oh, no, did she actually? Yes, I said it. What it allows me to do is just be me and not worry about some of the other things. But the other thing it does is that it says to younger artists, other artists my age, and to people who don't believe that it can happen past the age of 50, that you can create and be celebrated past your due date. I'm 70 years old, so if this is midlife, I'll be a very scary 150-year-old person.
That's for sure.
But I still have the will to create. I still create a great deal. And that just buoys me up. It just holds me up, and it says to other people that it can happen. And an African American woman of a certain age and style can be given that money.
So we have time for 2 more questions. Yes.
I don't sketch generally. Did everybody hear that? What's my process? Do I sketch first? Do I just create? Most of the time I just create. The only time I will do sketches is if I have to have someone assist me. So there were some large sculptures you saw, and some of them had to be made by other people. So I had to show them kind of what I wanted. If I were doing jewelry where I have to subcontract some kind of metal work, then I'd have to draw it. I did study metalwork, but I love melting stuff. So, my trying to solder things together meant, oh, look at that, that's a ball of metal. No, Joyce, that's your artwork. Oh. I told my friends the other day, I think you guys heard it, that I was talking about myself, and I said I don't have false humidity, but I meant humility. And I'm fattened, so I was probably talking about humidity too.
One last.
Wait, I haven't
Okay,
finished.
okay,
You just
okay.
don't be putting
Okay.
a Virgo. Don't be
Okay,
pushing me,
yeah,
Virgo.
Okay, we're on time.
Because I'm a Scorpio and I control everything.
Whoa.
Oh, look, the Scorpios are like, oh, that's right. Why do I not need to do drawings generally? Because I'm that good. That's not hubris.
Right.
That's working since I was 6. My mom taught me beadwork maybe and to sew when I was around 5. I'm 70. That's 65 years of work. What I would say to you and anyone else is to choose the thing that you love and that you have prowess in. Because how old are you? 48, you said. And she's like, and I won't say it out loud, damn it, thank you very much, Joyce. You probably have 40 more years of life. Suppose you're doing in that 40 years something you dislike. I chose to be this person and to work at this. And I chose to be really good at what I do. So that's why I don't need drawings, because I've taught myself to be in ways that are immediate and that can do what I want to do. And I've listened to others who have been my mentors and teachers. That's what I can say to you. And I don't have false pride about it, because hard work is hard work.
Right.
You know? And I will say it. I may not let you say it first. I may say it. Was there one more person that you saw, Big Daddy? I have to say Big Daddy, because you see his arms across. He done taken over.
One more person for that. Okay, our last question.
She asked, how do I decide what needs to be created when it needs to be farmed out to somebody or whatever? Well, firstly, that always depends upon what I can do and can't do. I go into a glass studio, I don't blow glass. I tried it once and thought, and why would I do this with my time? It's hot, it's terrible. I was at RISD working with the glass students, and they had the old style setting where the glory hole or the furnace is in the middle of a room, and then the windows are here. And I tell them what I wanted, and I walked up to the glory hole, I fainted, they dragged me to the air. No, that's an exaggeration, but not that much. I base that on what I can and cannot do. I base it on what I can get done. Some of the pieces here I did in Murano in Italy because I talked to my gallery about what I wanted to have happen. I do as much as I can. Almost, let's say 99% of the beadwork is done by me. Unless there's something so enormous and I can teach someone at the same time, then those things come together and we'll do it. I like to collaborate. You know, doing theater and being a singer means that collaboration with musicians is a big part of it. But I also know that the truest and purest creation is what I do on my own in myself. May I end this, Sir Jonathan?
I had something in mind, but
No,
go
no,
for it.
no.
Go
Wait,
for
wait.
it.
Absolutely not. You
no,
tell me what
no,
you had in mind, and then I'll
no,
end.
no. Oh, yeah, see? You
There's
see?
one more question.
Are you a Scorpio? Okay.
There is work in the gallery right now here, yes. She has a question, John. You have to talk. You talk to these women. I'm just trying to be a true sister and everything.
Okay, well, you know, before wait, there is time because, you know, if we were playing football, not American football, you know, there's time at the end, and we did start a little late, so yes.
No. She asked how many pieces I do in a year. Sometimes it takes me a year to do something. I may start, and then I'll work on it. And I was saying this also earlier, and I'm trying to make this artwork happen. And I'm beating it half to death. And what it's really telling me is that's a song, Joyce. You're supposed to be over there writing something. You're not supposed to be beating me up like that. And so I probably do at least 20 pieces a year, but maybe more, depending upon the size and how much, you know, out of my own studio I have to do.
All right, Sister Genius, how are we going to end this thing?
Okay. See, now he's going to call me a genius and stuff. Then he's going to slap me around behind it. I told you
Not
I
till
was
the
the
curtain
boss.
comes.
I'm not scared of dying, and I don't really care. If it's peace you find in dying, well then let my time be near. If it's peace you find in dying, and if dying time is here, then bundle up my coffin, 'cause it's cold way down there. Troubles are many, they're as deep as a well. I can say there ain't no heaven, and I'll pray there ain't no hell. I can say there ain't no heaven, and I pray there ain't no hell. But I never know by living, only by dying will tell. Give me my freedom for as long as I be. All I ask of a living is to have no chains on me. All I ask of a living is to have no chains on me. And all I ask of dying is to go naturally. Oh, I only want to go naturally. And when I die, and when I'm gone, you can sing, Norm, I'm there. There'll be one child born. There'll be one child born left. There'll be one child born to carry on. Oh, carry on. Thank you. He must be going somewhere because he's like TikTok. Wakanda for the youngins.